The house stood silent at the edge of the city, wrapped in glass and steel, watching the night rain slide down its windows like slow tears. Inside, a single room glowed softly. Machines hummed. A teenage boy lay still on a bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, legs unmoving beneath a thin blanket. Across the room, a man in an expensive suit stood frozen, his hand hovering over a tablet that showed dozens of tiny screens. Every corner of the house, every second recorded. Ethan Cole had built empires without blinking, but nothing had prepared him for the fear of losing his son. Before we go any further, I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Stories like this travel farther than we ever expect. Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how wide one moment of humanity can reach. Ethan hadn't always been this man. Tense shoulders, sleepless eyes, fingers that trembled when no one was looking. Once, he had laughed easily. Once, he had been just a father who lifted his son onto his shoulders at the beach while waves chased their feet. Now, 17-year-old Lucas couldn't even feel the sheets beneath him. The accident had happened fast. Too fast for memory to soften it. A rainy evening. A crosswalk. A truck that never slowed. When Ethan arrived at the hospital, the smell of antiseptic and fear crushed the air from his lungs. Doctors spoke gently, carefully, like people afraid of breaking glass. Spinal cord injury, severe. He may never walk again. Those words had hollowed Ethan out. Money moved mountains for Ethan Cole, except this one. He paid for the best surgeons, the finest therapy, the quietest private hospital wing. Still, Lucas remained paralyzed from the waist down. His body survived. Something inside him dimmed. So Ethan brought him home. The mansion was redesigned overnight. Ramps replaced stairs. Doors widened. Floors softened. But no amount of luxury could make Lucas speak again the way he used to. He answered questions with nods. He stared out windows for hours. Sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, tears slipped sideways into his hair. That was when fear took over Ethan's mind. He began to imagine threats everywhere. A maid alone with his son. A nurse losing patience. A visitor doing something careless. Ethan told himself he was protecting Lucas. That was the word he used. Protecting. Tiny cameras appeared in corners. Behind bookshelves. Inside smoke detectors. Even above Lucas's bed, angled just enough to see his face. No one knew. Except Ethan. Each night, after the house slept, he sat alone in his study, watching. Listening. His empire of screens flickered like a city at night. Most of the time, nothing happened. Cleaning. Quiet footsteps. Silence. Then Grace arrived. She was new. Mid-30s. Soft voice. Practical clothes. She had been hired through an agency, recommended for difficult emotional environments. Ethan barely looked at her resume. He only cared that she followed rules. No unnecessary talking, he told her on her first day. My son needs rest. Grace nodded. Of course, sir. Lucas barely acknowledged her at first. She moved gently around him, changing sheets, adjusting pillows, opening curtains just enough to let morning light spill in. She never rushed. Never sighed. Ethan watched her closely on the screens. Days passed. Then something small happened. One afternoon, Grace finished her tasks early. Instead of leaving, she pulled a chair beside Lucas's bed. She didn't speak at first. Just sat there, hands folded, looking out the window with him. Minutes passed. 10, 15. Ethan leaned forward in his chair, irritation tightening his jaw. Why is she still there? Then Grace spoke, barely above a whisper. The rain sounds different when it hits glass, she said. When I was a kid, I used to count the seconds between thunder. It made storms feel less scary. Lucas didn't respond, but his fingers twitched. Ethan froze. Grace smiled softly, not looking at him. You don't have to answer. I just thought, quiet doesn't always mean empty. She stood, adjusted the blanket, and left. Ethan replayed the footage 3 times that night. It was harmless. And even. Still, something unsettled him. He told himself it was control slipping. That was what he feared most. Over the next week, small moments stacked quietly on top of each other. Grace played soft music while cleaning, old piano pieces, gentle and slow. One morning, she brought in a small potted plant and placed it near the window. "It helps the air," she said simply. Another day, she read aloud from a book, stopping whenever Lucas's breathing changed, as if she could feel when he needed silence. Ethan watched everything. And for the first time since the accident, Lucas smiled. It was barely there. A ghost of what it used to be. But it was real. Ethan's chest tightened, not with joy, but confusion. He should have felt relieved. Instead, a quiet fear began to grow, slow and heavy, as he stared at the screens late into the night, sensing that something was changing inside his carefully controlled world. Ethan told himself he was imagining things. A smile didn't mean healing. A twitch didn't mean progress. He had built his entire life on facts, numbers, proof. Hope without evidence had always felt like a lie he refused to believe. Yet the footage kept pulling him back. Late one night, long after the house had gone quiet, Ethan sat alone in the blue glow of the monitors. His suit jacket lay forgotten on the floor. His tie was loosened, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He rewound the same clip again. Grace standing near the window, Lucas watching her reflection in the glass. "Do you know," Grace said gently, adjusting the curtain, "that sunlight still reaches the ocean floor? Even where it's dark." Lucas swallowed. His jaw tightened. A breath escaped him. Shaky, uneven. Ethan's fingers froze on the screen. That sound hadn't come from a machine. It came from his son. If you were standing there watching this unfold, what would you have done? Would you step in or let the moment breathe? Tell me honestly in the comments. And if this quiet kindness touched something in you, tap like. Sometimes that's the only way to say, "I felt it too." The next morning, Ethan went to Lucas's room in person, something he rarely did during Grace's shifts. He stood near the doorway, unseen, listening. Grace was kneeling beside the bed, tying Lucas's shoe with careful fingers. "You know," she said casually, "my brother hated mornings too. After his accident, he said waking up felt like starting a race with broken legs." Lucas's eyes flickered toward her. Grace didn't look up. "I told him something once. That races aren't always about speed. Sometimes they're about staying." She finished tying the shoe and looked at Lucas, her expression open, unafraid. "You're still here. That matters more than you think." Ethan felt something twist sharply in his chest. Lucas didn't smile this time. He spoke. "Why are you here?" The words were slow, fragile, like glass being set down too hard. Grace inhaled, surprised, not by the question, but by the sound of his voice. She answered carefully. "Because someone once stayed for me when I didn't think I deserved it." That was all she said. No dramatic speeches. No forced optimism. She stood and went about her work, leaving Lucas staring at the place where she had been. Ethan turned away before either of them could see him. That afternoon, Ethan called the agency. "I want a background check," he said sharply. "Full history. I don't care what it costs." When the report arrived, it didn't give him comfort. Grace Miller, former nursing assistant, left her last position abruptly 2 years ago. No criminal record. No complaints. But there was a gap. 6 months. No employment. No address. Ethan stared at the empty line like it was an accusation. That night, the cameras caught something that made his breath catch. Lucas dropped his fork during dinner. The sound echoed too loudly in the quiet room. His shoulders stiffened. His hands shook as he tried to reach down, then stopped, breath hitching as frustration flooded his face. Before the nurse could react, Grace stepped in. "It's okay," she said softly, crouching to retrieve the fork. She didn't rush, didn't make it obvious. She placed it back in his hand, steadying his fingers just enough. Lucas's eyes filled with tears. "I hate this," he whispered. Grace met his gaze. "I know. Not it will get better. Not be strong. Just, Lucas broke. He cried the way children cry when they're too tired to hold it in anymore. Silent at first, then shaking, helpless. Grace didn't look away. She didn't try to fix him. She simply stayed, one hand resting lightly on his arm, grounding him. Ethan watched from the study, his vision blurring. He hadn't seen his son cry like that since the hospital. Back then, Ethan had stood stiffly at the foot of the bed, unsure what to do with his own fear, his own guilt. He had told himself that providing solutions was love. Now, a woman he barely knew was doing what he couldn't, and that terrified him. Over the following days, Lucas began to change in small, dangerous ways. He asked Grace questions. About books. About music. About the plant by the window. One evening he asked, "Do you think people can still matter if they can't do anything?" Grace didn't answer right away. She sat beside him and said, "I think worth isn't measured by movement. It's measured by presence." Lucas nodded slowly, like someone filing away a truth for later. Ethan's grip on control started to slip. He began interrupting Grace's shifts, asking pointed questions, watching her reactions. She never flinched, never grew defensive, until one night, Ethan rewound a clip by accident, back past the day's footage, past yesterday, past the week. And then he saw it, a moment he had missed. Grace standing alone in Lucas's room long after her shift should have ended. The lights were dim. Lucas was asleep. Grace reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small photograph. Her hands trembled as she looked at it. And then, she whispered a name. Not Lucas's. Ethan leaned forward, heart pounding, dread creeping up his spine as the truth hovered just out of reach. Ethan watched the clip again. And again. Grace stood by Lucas's bed, the soft lamp casting a warm halo around her shoulders. In her hands, the photograph shook slightly, like it weighed more than paper ever should. Ethan leaned closer to the screen, adjusting the audio. "I'm trying," Grace whispered. "I really am." She lowered the photo to her chest, closed her eyes for a moment, then carefully placed it back into her pocket. Before leaving the room, she reached out, not to Lucas, but to the empty air above him, stopping just short, as if afraid to cross an invisible line. Then she turned off the light and left. Ethan sat back, heart pounding. Trying, that what? Sleep never came that night. By morning, suspicion had wrapped itself tightly around Ethan's thoughts. Every kind word Grace spoke felt layered now. Every quiet moment felt rehearsed. He hated himself for thinking it, but fear had a loud voice when it came to his son. He summoned Grace to his study that afternoon. The room was intimidating by design. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, dark wood, city skylines stretching endlessly behind him. Grace stood near the door, hands clasped, calm but alert. "Do you always stay after your shift?" Ethan asked, not looking up from his desk. "Only when Lucas has trouble sleeping," she replied evenly. "Nighttime can be hard for him." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're paid to follow a schedule." "Yes," she said. "But I'm human before I'm an employee." Silence filled the room. Ethan finally looked at her. "What were you holding last night?" Grace didn't flinch. She inhaled slowly. "A photograph." "Of who?" Her eyes met his, steady, honest, but guarded. "Someone I lost." Ethan leaned back. "You understand why that concerns me." "I do," she said softly. "But my grief doesn't put your son at risk." Ethan stood abruptly. "You don't decide that." For the first time, something shifted in Grace's expression, not fear, but pain. "Neither does money," she replied quietly. The words landed heavier than either of them expected. Ethan dismissed her without another word. That evening, Lucas noticed the tension immediately. "You're angry," he said slowly, struggling with the words. Ethan forced a smile. "I'm fine." Lucas shook his head. "You always say that when you're not." The honesty stung. Later, Grace approached Lucas with his medication. Her movements were careful now, restrained, like someone walking on thin ice. "I might not be here much longer," she said gently. Lucas's eyes widened. "Why?" Grace hesitated. "Your father is protecting you." Lucas swallowed. "From sleep." Grace didn't answer. That night, Lucas refused dinner. He stared at the ceiling, jaw clenched, frustration simmering beneath his stillness. Ethan sat beside him, trying, awkwardly, to fill the silence. "You don't need her," Ethan said. "You have nurses." Doctors. Me. Lucas turned his head slowly. He listens. Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. When was the last time he had simply listened? Have you ever had someone help you when no one else would? If yes, write yes in the comments, and if you can, tell me their name. Gratitude has a strange way of finding its way back home. The next day, Ethan received another report. Grace Miller's gap in employment wasn't empty. It was a hospital. A long-term care facility. Ethan drove there himself. The building was modest. Old brick. The kind of place people passed without seeing. Inside, the air smelled faintly of soap and quiet endurance. A receptionist looked up, surprised to see a man like Ethan Cole standing in front of her desk. I'm looking for information about Grace Miller, he said, flashing his name like a badge. The woman nodded slowly. She volunteered here for 6 months. Volunteered? Ethan repeated. Yes. Her younger brother was a patient here. Spinal injury. Car accident. The receptionist's voice softened. He didn't make it. Ethan felt the ground tilt. She stayed long after visiting hours, the woman continued. Read to him. Talk to him when he couldn't respond. Even after he passed, she kept coming. Said helping others was the only thing that kept her breathing. Ethan drove home in silence. That night, he didn't watch the cameras. He went to Lucas's room instead. Lucas was awake, staring at the window where rain traced familiar paths down the glass. Dad? He said. Yes. Do you think? Grace is sad. Ethan swallowed. Yes. I think she is. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, she still smiles. Ethan nodded slowly. Some people learn how to carry pain without letting it spill. The next morning, Ethan told Grace she could stay. But trust, real trust, was still a fragile thing. And neither of them yet knew that the hardest moment was still coming. Trust didn't return all at once. It crept back slowly, like light testing the edge of a dark room. Ethan didn't remove the cameras. Not yet. But he stopped watching them every night. Some evenings, he even left his study door open, letting the house breathe without surveillance humming in his ears. Grace noticed the change. Not because Ethan said anything, but because he finally began speaking to her, not at her. How was physical therapy today? He asked one afternoon, standing beside Lucas's wheelchair. Grace glanced at Lucas first. Hard, she answered honestly. But he didn't quit. Lucas exhaled, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She didn't let me. Grace raised an eyebrow playfully. I let you rest. I didn't let you disappear. Ethan felt that sentence echo in his chest long after he walked away. Weeks passed. Spring edged into the city, softening the sharpness of winter. Lucas began joining meals at the dining table again. His appetite returned in small pieces. Sometimes, when Grace read to him, Ethan sat quietly across the room, pretending to work while listening to every word. One evening, a storm knocked out the power. The house fell into sudden darkness. Emergency lights flickered weakly. Lucas's breathing quickened, old memories clawing their way back. The crash, the hospital, the helpless waiting. It's okay, Grace said instantly, her voice steady. She took his hand without hesitation. I'm here. Ethan froze. For one terrifying second he almost told her to step back. Then he saw Lucas's grip tighten, not in fear, but in trust. They sat like that until the generator kicked in, lights slowly returning. When it did, Ethan noticed something that stopped him cold. Lucas was still holding her hand. And smiling. Now it's your turn, share one small good thing you did recently. It doesn't have to be big or perfect. Write it below so someone else remembers that kindness still exists. Your moment might be exactly what another heart needs tonight. That night, Ethan made a decision that scared him more than installing the cameras ever had. He turned one off. Just one, the one above Lucas's bed. Grace noticed the absence the next morning. She didn't say anything. She simply met Ethan's eyes and nodded, gratitude shining briefly before she masked it with professionalism. Lucas noticed too. Dad, he said carefully, the light, it's gone. Ethan knelt beside him. You deserve privacy. I forgot that for a while. Lucas studied his father's face, then whispered, thank you. For the first time since the accident, Ethan felt like he was finally doing something right. But life has a cruel way of waiting for peace before striking. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Lucas had collapsed during therapy. Ethan reached the hospital in record time, heart slamming against his ribs. Doctors spoke quickly. Too quickly. Words blurred together. Infection, complication, surgery. Grace stood in the corner of the room, pale but composed, hands clasped tightly in front of her. When Ethan's knees threatened to give out, she steadied him, not with touch, but with presence. "He's strong," she said quietly. "I've seen it." Hours dragged by. Ethan sat alone in the waiting room, staring at the floor, replaying every moment he had ever failed his son. The cameras. The distance. The silence. Grace approached him slowly. "May I sit?" she asked. He nodded. They sat side by side, two people bound by the same fear. "My brother," Grace said softly, eyes fixed on the far wall, "used to say the hardest part wasn't the pain. It was feeling invisible." Ethan closed his eyes. "I made Lucas invisible," he whispered. "I watched him instead of being with him." Grace shook her head gently. "You stayed in the only way you knew how." Ethan laughed bitterly. "That's not enough." Grace turned to him. "It is, if you're willing to change." The surgeon finally emerged. Lucas would recover. Slowly. Painfully. But he would recover. Ethan broke down in the hallway, shoulders shaking, grief and relief colliding violently. Grace stood beside him, steady as stone, letting him fall apart without judgment. But as they prepared to leave, a nurse approached Grace quietly. "There's a call for you," she said. "From the long-term care center." Grace stiffened. Ethan noticed immediately. "Is everything okay?" Grace hesitated, just long enough for dread to creep in. "My brother's room," she said. "They're clearing it permanently." The words were quiet, but they shattered something fragile inside her. Ethan watched her shoulders tense, watched grief resurface like a wound never allowed to heal. For the first time, he saw her not as strength, but as someone barely holding together. And in that moment he understood. This wasn't just about protecting Lucas anymore. It was about two broken people trying to keep each other alive. Grace didn't cry. Not in the hallway. Not in the car. Not even when she returned to the quiet apartment she rarely spoke about. She thanked Ethan for the ride, her voice steady, and said she'd see Lucas in the morning. But that night the cameras saw what no one else did. Grace sat alone in Lucas's room long after midnight, the city lights casting broken reflections across the walls. She held the same photograph Ethan had seen before. Her brother, younger, smiling from a wheelchair, eyes bright with a kind of stubborn hope. "I tried to stay strong today," she whispered. "Just like you asked me to." Her voice cracked. Ethan stood in the study, watching, his chest tightening as he realized the cameras were now doing the very thing he once feared, witnessing pain instead of preventing it. Grace wiped her eyes quickly, stood, and placed the photograph on Lucas's bedside table. For a moment, she hesitated, then gently took Lucas's hand, asleep, unaware, and pressed the photo into his palm. "So you won't feel alone," she murmured. She left the room quietly. Ethan shut the monitors off. He didn't sleep. The next morning, Grace didn't come in. Hours passed. Lucas kept glancing at the door, saying nothing. Ethan made calls, the agency, her phone, the care center. No answer. By evening, panic settled heavy in his chest. Then a message arrived. "I'm sorry. I needed one day. I didn't want Lucas to see me break." Ethan stared at the screen. For years, he had demanded strength from everyone around him. Now he understood how cruel that expectation could be. He typed back only 4 words. "Take the time you need." Grace returned 2 days later. Her eyes were tired but clear. She knelt beside Lucas immediately, apologizing. "You didn't do anything wrong," Lucas said softly. "You kept your picture safe." Grace's breath hitched. Ethan turned away, blinking hard. Later that week, Lucas asked for something unexpected. "I want to go outside," he said. Ethan froze. The therapist said, "I know," Lucas interrupted gently, "but I just want air." Ethan looked to Grace. She nodded. We can try. Slowly. The afternoon sun was warm, the garden quiet. Birds settled on the fence. Lucas closed his eyes as fresh air filled his lungs. I forgot this smell, he whispered. Grace smiled. Ethan watched from a few steps back, something inside him loosening. Then it happened. A sharp cry cut through the calm. Lucas's body jerked violently. His hands gripped the armrests. His face twisted in pain. Grace reacted instantly. Lucas, look at me. Breathe. Ethan rushed forward, panic flooding his senses. What's happening? Spasm, Grace said quickly. It can happen. Stay calm. Lucas gasped, tears streaming. I can't. Grace knelt directly in front of him, blocking everything else out. She took his hands firmly, grounding him. You're here, she said, voice steady but fierce. You're safe. I've got you. The spasm passed. Silence fell. Ethan's knees nearly buckled with relief. Grace slowly released Lucas's hands, checking him carefully. Then Lucas said something that shattered the world open. I felt it, he whispered. Ethan's heart stopped. Felt what? My leg, Lucas said, eyes wide with disbelief. Just a little. The doctor confirmed it days later. Minimal sensation had returned. Not a miracle. But a door cracked open. If that moment hit you hard, leave a red heart in the comments. Sometimes a simple symbol carries what words can't hold. Ethan sat alone that night, staring at the camera controls. One by one he turned them off. Not because he stopped fearing the world, but because he finally trusted the people in it. Yet even as hope crept back in, Ethan knew one truth remained unspoken. Grace had given everything to save his son. And he had never asked what it was costing her. The answer would come sooner than he was ready for. Grace began pulling away in ways so subtle that Ethan almost missed them. She still showed up on time. Still smiled for Lucas. Still spoke gently, patiently. But the extra moments were gone. No more lingering after shifts, no quiet talks by the window, no late-night reading when insomnia clawed at Lucas's chest. She was protecting herself. Ethan recognized it too well. Lucas noticed first. You're leaving early, he said one afternoon, watching Grace pack her bag. I just have a few things to take care of, she replied lightly. Lucas frowned. You say that every day. Grace paused. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. Then she smiled again. Some things need tending, that's all. That night, Ethan made a choice he had been avoiding. He knocked on the door of the small apartment Grace had listed in her file. The building was old, narrow, nothing like the world Ethan lived in. When Grace opened the door, surprise flickered across her face, followed quickly by guarded calm. Is something wrong with Lucas? She asked immediately. No, Ethan said. This is about you. Silence stretched between them. Grace stepped aside. Come in. The apartment was simple. Almost bare. One framed photo sat on the shelf, the same one she carried with her. Ethan gestured to it. Your brother? Yes. You give everything to my son, Ethan said quietly. But you never let anyone give anything back to you. Grace folded her arms, a familiar shield. That's not part of the job. No, Ethan said. But it's part of being human. She looked away. I learned a long time ago not to expect help. Ethan swallowed. I learned a long time ago how to hide instead of feel. The words surprised them both. Grace's voice softened. Why are you here, Ethan? Because I owe you an apology, he said. For watching instead of trusting. For controlling instead of caring. And for letting you carry your grief alone. Grace closed her eyes. You didn't mean harm, she said. But intent doesn't erase impact. Ethan nodded. I know. Tears welled in Grace's eyes, uninvited and furious. I stayed strong for Lucas because no one stayed strong for my brother at the end. I thought if I could save one person, it might mean his pain wasn't for nothing. Ethan felt his chest cave inward. Does it still hurt? He asked. Every day, she whispered. They sat in silence, not awkward, not heavy. Just real. And then Grace said the words that changed everything. I'm thinking of leaving. Ethan looked up sharply. Leaving? I can't heal where I'm bleeding, she said gently. Lucas is getting stronger. He doesn't need me the way he did. Ethan stood. Panic surged through him. The old instinct to control, to fix, to stop loss before it happened. But this time, he didn't reach for power. He reached for honesty. If you leave, he said slowly, it will break him. Grace flinched. And if you stay without healing, Ethan continued, it will break you. They both knew the truth. The decision couldn't be forced. The next day, Lucas overheard them. Not the whole conversation. Just enough. Grace packing her bag. Ethan's low voice. The word leaving hanging in the air like a threat. Lucas waited until Grace was alone with him. You're going, he said flatly. Grace knelt beside him. I haven't decided yet. Lucas's hands trembled. Everyone leaves. Grace closed her eyes. I don't want to hurt you. You already are, he said, tears spilling freely. You taught me how to stay. The words cut deeper than any accusation. That night, Ethan found Lucas staring at the dark ceiling. Dad. Lucas said. Did you ever forgive yourself for the accident? Ethan's breath caught. No. Lucas nodded slowly. Maybe that's why you couldn't forgive anyone else either. The truth landed hard. Before life forces its hardest choice, I want to ask you something honestly. Could you forgive after all this pain? Type forgive if you believe you could, or never if that wound would be too deep for you. There's no right answer, only real ones. The climax came without warning. Lucas spiked a fever in the middle of the night. Ethan rushed him to the hospital. Grace followed, not as an employee, not as a caretaker, but as someone who couldn't stay away. Hours blurred together. Monitors beeped. Doctors moved fast. Lucas's condition worsened. And then he coded. For 30 seconds, the world stopped. Grace stood frozen, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles went white. Ethan whispered his son's name over and over, like prayer, like bargaining. Then a breath. A heartbeat. Lucas stabilized. But when the room cleared, the doctor spoke quietly. He needs long-term rehabilitation. Months. Maybe years. Grace and Ethan looked at each other. In that shared glance, everything was laid bare. Fear, guilt, and the understanding that whatever came next, none of them would survive it unchanged. The rehabilitation center smelled like disinfectant and quiet determination. Wide hallways echoed with slow wheels and careful footsteps. Sunlight poured through tall windows, warming the polished floors. This was where hope came to work every day, not loudly, not dramatically, but patiently. Lucas hated it at first. The exercises hurt. His body felt like a stranger that refused to listen. Some mornings he wouldn't look at anyone. Other days, anger spilled out of him in sharp words and clenched fists. I'm tired, he snapped once, tears streaking down his face. I try, and nothing changes. Grace crouched in front of him, her voice steady but soft. Progress isn't loud. It whispers. And it doesn't come every day, but it does come. Ethan watched from the doorway, hands clenched behind his back. He came every day now. No meetings. No excuses. Just presence. Sometimes he read aloud while Lucas rested. Sometimes he sat in silence, learning not to fill every moment with solutions. He learned to ask instead of assume. What do you need right now? He asked one afternoon. Lucas thought for a long moment. Just stay. So Ethan stayed. Weeks passed. Then one morning, something small happened. Lucas wiggled his toes. Barely. Almost not at all. But it happened. Grace laughed. A real laugh, bright and unguarded. Ethan dropped to his knees, overwhelmed, pressing his forehead to his son's hand. I saw it, Lucas whispered, eyes shining. I really saw it. From that day on, the work changed. It wasn't just therapy anymore. It was purpose. Grace still hadn't decided whether she would stay permanently. The question hovered between them, unspoken but heavy. Ethan never pushed. He had learned that love didn't demand, it invited. One evening, after a long day, Grace sat alone in the rehab center's small garden. The sky burned orange and pink as the sun dipped low. Ethan joined her quietly, handing her a cup of coffee. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said. Grace smiled faintly. "I know." She stared at the sky. "I used to think staying meant sacrificing myself. Now I'm realizing leaving doesn't always mean healing either." Ethan nodded. "Sometimes healing is choosing where your pain can finally rest." Grace turned to him. "And where is that, for you?" Ethan didn't answer right away. "With my son," he said finally. "And with the truth." Grace breathed that in. The breakthrough came on an ordinary Tuesday. No cameras. No audience. Just effort. Lucas stood. Not alone. Not steady. But standing. Grace supported one side. The therapist the other. Ethan held his breath so hard his chest hurt. Lucas shook violently, legs trembling like they might give out at any second. "I'm standing," Lucas said, disbelief flooding his voice. "I'm standing." Tears streamed down Ethan's face. He didn't wipe them away. "You are," he whispered. "You're doing it." Lucas took one step. Then collapsed into Grace's arms, laughing and crying at the same time. That night, Grace made her decision. She found Ethan on the rooftop of the rehab center, the city spread beneath them like a living thing. "I'll stay," she said. "Not because I'm afraid to leave, but because I finally want to build something instead of just surviving." Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. "We'll do it right this time," he said. "Together." Grace nodded. "Together." Lucas learned the truth the next morning. "You're not going," he said, voice careful. Grace smiled. "Not if you'll still have me." Lucas didn't answer. He reached for her hand instead. The cameras at the mansion were gone now. All of them. Ethan had them removed completely. When someone asked him why, he said simply, "I don't need to watch love anymore. I live in it." Months later, Lucas walked, slowly, imperfectly, but proudly, across the rehab center floor. Ethan stood at one end. Grace at the other. He made it halfway. Then all the way. If you believe love still wins, even after pain, even after fear, comment, "He." Let's fill this moment with hope. Somewhere, someone scrolling right now needs to see that light still breaks through. As applause filled the room, Ethan realized something profound. The cameras had once shown him what he feared. But love had shown him what he was missing. And now, as he watched his son stand taller each day, surrounded by compassion instead of control, Ethan knew the ending wasn't about recovery alone. It was about redemption, earned, chosen, and finally embraced. The first time Lucas walked back into his home, the mansion felt smaller. Not because the walls had changed, but because something heavy was finally gone. Sunlight poured through open windows. The air smelled like fresh paint and something warmer, something alive. The ramps were still there. The wide doors too. But the silence that once pressed down on the house had lifted. Lucas paused in the living room, standing on his own for a few seconds before easing into a chair. He looked around slowly. "It feels different," he said. Ethan nodded. "It is." Grace stood near the doorway, hands folded, taking it all in. She hadn't seen the house like this before, without tension humming beneath every surface. No cameras blinked from corners. No hidden red lights. No watching. Just living. That night, they ate dinner together at the long table, not rushed, not quiet. Lucas talked about therapy. Grace laughed at a story Ethan told about burning his first meal after years of never using the kitchen. "You're terrible at cooking," Grace teased gently. Ethan smiled. "I'm learning." Lucas watched them both, something peaceful settling into his expression. Later, when Grace prepared to leave for the evening, Lucas stopped her. "Will you read tomorrow?" he asked. Grace smiled. "Of course." When she left, Ethan walked through the house alone. He passed the study, empty now. No monitors. No screens. Just a desk and a window open to the night. He remembered the man he had been, convinced that love meant control, that protection meant surveillance. He finally understood the truth. Fear watches. Love stays. Weeks turned into months. Lucas walked more each day. Some days were painful. Some steps ended in frustration. But he kept going. Grace adjusted her role, less caretaker, more companion. Ethan became something he had never practiced before. A present father. One afternoon, Lucas asked a question that caught Ethan off guard. "Dad, why did you really install the cameras?" Ethan sat beside him, thinking carefully. "Because I was terrified," he said. "And instead of facing that fear, I tried to trap the world so it couldn't hurt you." Lucas nodded slowly. "But you were hurting too." "Yes," Ethan admitted. "And I didn't know how to ask for help." Lucas reached out, gripping his father's hand, stronger now. "You can now," he said. Ethan's eyes filled. That evening, Grace joined them in the garden. The same place where Lucas had once felt his first spark of sensation return. Fireflies flickered in the dusk. Grace spoke softly. "I used to think my brother's pain ended when he did. I was wrong. It stayed with me until I stopped running from it." Ethan looked at her. "And now? Now it has a place," she said. "Not control. Not sacrifice. Just love." Lucas leaned back, closing his eyes. "I think he'd like that." Silence settled, not empty, but full. Before this story reaches its final breath, don't scroll away quietly if it moved you. Tap like, "Not for me, but for the soul who lived through this pain and still chose kindness." One click can be your way of saying, "I felt you. You mattered." And if you're carrying something heavy too, know that you're not unseen here. Years later, visitors would ask Ethan about his success, about how he built so much. He would smile politely and change the subject. Because the thing he was proudest of couldn't be measured in numbers. It was the day he stopped watching and started trusting. It was the moment he learned that protecting someone doesn't mean shielding them from the world. It means walking beside them through it. Lucas would always carry scars. So would Grace. So would Ethan. But scars, they learned, are not proof of weakness. They are proof of survival. And in that house, once ruled by fear, now warmed by forgiveness, 3 lives moved forward together. Not perfect, but whole.